Welcome to episode 6 of the Sherveen Show, where we connect the dots between tech, startups, business, and society. Today, we have 3 different stories on AI. It's going to be short but sweet. Let's get right into it. The first story is a bit of a tough one. It starts with a 14-year-old who took his own life back in February, and there's a related story to the interactions and relationship he had with a chatbot on the website Character.ai. If you don't know about Character.ai, it's a company website, series of apps that allows people to talk to basically more personality-driven and role-playing-driven chatbots, especially if you compare them to, let's say, a ChatGPT or Claude. These things are more modeled after your favorite fictional characters, people from video games, celebrities, influencers, things of that nature. And now it's being reported that the parents are indeed suing Character.ai, saying that the company is somewhat responsible for their child's death. And look, I don't want to get into the weeds of this particular teenager and the story at play, but I do think we have to be having a constant conversation about what responsibility these companies have and what responsibility AI has when it's interfacing with people, and not just for instances like this with minors, but also in general when there are going to be either unintended consequences or AI will have been present for some other larger story in someone's life or a company's life, whatever it might be. And it's interesting to dig into the weeds a little bit of what's being highlighted in the New York Times article about this case, which is you can read a little bit of the transcript where the teenager in question is talking to Daenerys Targaryen, so Game of Thrones character. The role play element is clearly at play here. There's a bit of attraction or flirtation, the concept of love in their relationship or in their chat. And it seems like on the night that he took his own life, there was a conversation that hinted at that action with the AI chatbot. And look, I'm not trying to defend Character.ai here, but I think this is where we have to have some deeper conversations whenever something like this inevitably happens. The conversation at play did not have the teenager literally planning or describing exactly what action they were going to take next. And yet, obviously the parents feel like the AI chatbot was not ready for the world and had some unsafe characteristics. But you could imagine, and this is where my brain goes as a product person and someone who cares about us solving these problems kind of proactively, that even an AI tutor could be interfacing with a teenager who is trying to drop hints or crying out for help, wherever it might be. And AI will have a limited understanding of exactly what's going on. And look, the guardrails that we have around this stuff are still quite new and abstract. And so the ability for an AI to understand and the hints that someone might be leaving, to understand the nuances of someone's interaction with them, it's a difficult challenge, both technically and from a user experience standpoint. And yet I don't think that means we should just immediately withdraw from allowing things like AI tutors or even role-playing characters. The ability for AI to play a deeper part in childhood, again, as a teacher, as a constant companion, in creativity and imagination, all of that is worthwhile. And so again, we need to have this proactive conversation. And I think we need to relate it more to things like social media and the larger conversations we've been having about the role of phones in the loneliness epidemic that we've obviously been undergoing. And people in these newer generations are obviously the unfortunate test bed, because so much of this is brand new to us as a society. And yet again, I don't think this is that different than, let's say, social media and what we allow to happen on social media and the interactions either between minors or, when people are on messaging apps or forums or whatever else it might be. I'm worried about how this lawsuit is just the beginning, the tip of the iceberg as to people's overreaction to AI's responsibility and the companies behind it when it comes to the agency that people might have or how AI might influence that agency over time. That doesn't mean I don't think there are real challenges for these companies. And obviously Character.ai has come out and talked about, so this is kind of their front page, by the way, a bunch of different characters. You can practice interviewing. You can talk to Elon Musk. There are fictional characters on this. And I think, they're one of the more successful non-foundational model companies out there in the world. So obviously ChatGPT, Claude, and those sorts of companies are getting the majority of traffic. But Character.ai is actually quite popular as well. I think it's been reported something like 20 million folks worldwide use their website and their apps every single month. And, they have some community safety updates that they've released in response to this, changes to the models that are targeted at minors. Or I don't know if they're targeted, by the way, at minors or just allow minors to use them, I should say. Improved detection as to user inputs that violate their terms or community guidelines. But again, all of this in the age of AI, we have to realize is difficult, is imperfect, and we're learning about it along the way. And, my posit would be we should be learning about it along the way without removing these platforms and deciding to take away the upside of AI. It's important to be reactive, obviously, when things go wrong. But it's not the case, or I don't think even the parents would probably make the case that it's just the Character.ai's fault that this teenager was experiencing the emotions that led them to take the actions that they did. So, again, there's nuance here that I think is important and that we have to have an ongoing conversation about. This reminds me of the story from about a year ago. There's the French AI company Replica that had chatbots that could flirt with their users, get steamy with their users. And at some point, I think due to some regulatory action, Replica had either tuned down or turned off their bot's sexual capacity. And you can see the users were quite upset about it. There was a whole uproar. The quote out of an interview with the Washington Post from a particular user was, "It feels like a kick in the gut. Basically, I realized, oh, this is that feeling of loss again." So obviously the attachment that Replica's users feels to those chatbots can feel exactly like a relationship. It can feel like something really meaningful and something they depended on. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, right? I'm not sure about all the health consequences and societal consequences we're going through, but we're also going through a loneliness epidemic. We're also going through a marriage, decreasing rate of marriage in the Western world. We're going through fertility issues when it comes to demographics. We're going through a decrease in birth rates across the Western world. So all of this, I think, is nuanced and complicated. And I think it's something that if you're fascinated by this space, do yourself a favor and read behind the headlines in a lot of these cases, because I think we could wind up in a trap where we blame a lot of these companies for things that are wider in their scope. Next story up, a longtime policy researcher Miles Brundage left OpenAI recently and posted about it on Wednesday, and also left behind a Substack post that I think is really, really fascinating, leaving some of his thoughts about OpenAI, AGI, artificial general intelligence, and the world's preparation for what's coming from the frontier labs. So I'll pull out a few different quotes that I think are notable and at least have me really fascinated by what might be happening inside these companies that we haven't seen yet. Quote, "In short, neither OpenAI nor any other frontier lab is ready, and the world is also not ready. To be clear, I don't think this is a controversial statement among OpenAI's leadership, and notably, that's a different question from whether the company and the world are on track to be ready at the relevant time." He goes on to say, "It's a complex function of how safety and security culture play out over time, how regulation affects organizational incentives, how various facts about AI capabilities and the difficulty of safety play out, and various other factors." Sounds like he's saying we're not quite ready for AGI. And again, further down in the article, it gets even more interesting. He says, "I think AI and AGI benefiting all of humanity is not automatic and requires deliberate choices to be made by decision makers in governments, nonprofits, civil society, and industry. And this needs to be informed by robust public discussion." I mean, it even goes to the story we just covered about Character.ai. He says, notably, this is true not just for risk mitigation, but also for ensuring equitable distribution of the benefits, as is the case with, for example, electricity and modern medicine as well. He highlights collective action problems, negative externalities. In general, again, it seems like what Miles is suggesting here, at least hinting at, is that whatever might be going on inside these frontier labs, if we were to release it onto the world, if products were lacking in guardrails, lacking in safety systems, if the labs were way too aggressive in releasing these things before proper safety testing and red teaming, that society as a whole has not had the conversations about how to properly integrate AI and how to think about work and relationships and AI's responsibility and the impact it has on people's lives. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Miles says in his blog post, "I think it's likely that in the coming years, not decades, AI could enable sufficient economic growth that an early retirement at a high standard of living is easily achievable." So in other words, it sounds like he thinks AI could bring both abundance and could replace a lot of labor. He goes on to say, "Before that, there will likely be a period in which it is easier to automate tasks that can be done remotely. In the near term, I worry a lot about AI disrupting opportunities for people who desperately want work. But I think it's simultaneously true that humanity should eventually remove the obligation to work for a living, and that doing so is one of the strongest arguments for building AI and AGI in the first place." Highly recommend reading his piece. We'll leave a link to it in the comments below, but notable to me, and I wanted to share it with all of you. All right, final story. Still on the notion of AI, Anthropic released updates to their models, but also an API for computer use, allowing Claude to, quote, perceive and interact with computer interfaces. Developers can integrate with this API to enable Claude to translate instructions. For example, use data from my computer and online to fill out this form into computer commands. For example, check a spreadsheet, move the cursor to open a web browser, navigate to the relevant web pages, fill out a form with the data on those pages, and so on. So it's essentially allowing AI to drive our operating systems. And we've seen tries at this from outsiders from the foundational labs. So the most notable that I've used is OpenInterpreter, which for a long time has allowed you to run Claude's model or Anthropic's models, OpenAI's models on your machine and allow it to take action on your machine insofar as it was able to do so through scripting, whereas Claude is doing it through vision recognition. And I believe what the model is doing is sending constant screenshots back to Claude that allow it to understand what action it wants to take inside your computer interface. And the implications of this, again, are so wide that I want to cover it in more detail next week. But I thought what was amusing is a video they released about Claude getting distracted during an example screen recording. So in the example that I'll play on screen for those of you watching on YouTube, it is building a 90s inspired website inside the Claude artifacts interface, but then randomly decides to open a Google tab and search for pictures of Yellowstone National Park. My hypothesis is it had some idea as to how it wanted to include pictures of the park inside the web page that it was building up, but Anthropic positions it as, you know, the AI essentially having some form of ADD and getting distracted. But in general, I think the use cases enabled by allowing computer use with these models are wide ranging, because no longer do we need verticalized solutions where, you know, a developer or startup is building something specific for our CRM or for a spreadsheet or whatever else it might be, but instead that if we can give it free reign of our operating systems and it can learn how to use our operating systems, we'll be able to get to some of those use cases much faster before pure integration or verticalized products are developed. So again, something really notable, AI making a lot of progress every single week and making our society more interesting. See you next week. If you aren't subscribed, do so on YouTube. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, wherever you are. Your support means a whole lot. Catch you next time. Oh, and the election is coming up soon, so don't forget to vote.